Hello and welcome to the channel again. This is Sam trying to spin to win on Swift. Well, it's been a little while since my last race vlog. Apologies for that. But in my last race, I managed a pretty good 5-minute effort. And that has had both positive and negative consequences. I was really happy with that effort. It's not every day you improve your 5-minute power by over 20 watts. So that was a real positive. And on the back of that, I also got categorized as Cat A, which was always a dream of mine or a goal of mine. Never thought that would happen, but I'm happy it did. But it also led to some unintended negative consequences.
Oh, really?
By being categorized as Cat A now, I believe, although I'm not 100% on this, but I think that's the case, I can no longer compete for my team in the ZRL racing in the finals. They're coming up in a few weeks. And if that's the case, then that's really, really annoying. And my VELO rating also took a huge jump up on the back of that 5-minute effort, to the point where I'm no longer eligible to race in the dirt racing series for my team. So also very, very annoying.
Shush! I'm so annoyed!
And finally, to top it off, I was also upgraded to DRA in the FRR categorization scheme. And there is a one-off race on the 29th of March, which I intend to do, but I'm gonna get absolutely smoked in the DRA category. That should be an interesting one. And after that, there is no more FRR racing until later in the year. So hopefully by then, I will have dropped back to the CRP category, which is where I belong. But all of that aside, this 5-minute effort didn't impact club ladder racing, which is great, which is what we're gonna be doing today. And I have a tough week of training in the legs. I did have a rest day yesterday, but I just don't know how recovered I am.
No more excuses.
Yes, no more excuses, Sam, no more excuses. Let's just get on with it. So today we're facing the L'Equipe Provence Troublion team, which I actually know pretty well. It seems like many of the members there also do FRR racing in my category, so I've gotten to know some of them reasonably well, at least their cycling capabilities. But before we have a look at the team comparison, let's have a look at today's course. And it's one of my favorite courses on Swift, the MUCKLE YIN. The MUCKLE YIN, loved by some and hated by most.
I hate it! I hate it!
This is one of my favorite courses in Swift, and not just because I live in Scotland. I think it has a bit of everything. Some short punchy climbs, some longer climbs requiring more sustained efforts, steep downhills, and generally lots of places where you can try different tactics based on your team's strengths and weaknesses compared to the competition. In summary, I think it's a great course for a club ladder race. The key sections are of course the two main climbs, the Sgurr Summitt North and the Sgurr Summitt South. The com for the Summitt South is, I think, a bit misleading, as there is a significant climb before the actual com that you really need to count as part of the overall climb. Of course, we go up the Corkscrew and the Breakaway Bray as well a couple of times, and the Clyde Kicker towards the end of the race. All right, let's have a quick look at today's competition.
Introducing tonight's fighters.
In the blue corner, the Vikings who bring the pain. Team Swedish Swifters Ragnarök. In the red corner, we have the French Musketeers. Wait, there are no French present at all in this team. Oh well, L'Equipe Provence Troublion. Okay, so the first thing to mention is that, unfortunately, the LEQP team only fielded 4 riders today. I think one more guy signed up last minute, but didn't make it to the race at the end of the day, which is a shame. so that gives us a bit of an advantage from the get-go. However, even so, I feel the teams are still relatively evenly matched. In fact, I raced Sanntu, Chris and Pedro in the recent FRR World Tour series, and I know they're all strong riders. Sanntu in particular, who has a very good finishing sprint on him. And as you can see from the watts per kilo figures, we are evenly matched across the board. In fact, the LEQP team does seem slightly stronger from this perspective, but again, we do have one more rider, so I would have to say we are the slight favorites going into the race. All right, we have a great course and two pretty evenly matched teams, I think. So the time for talk is over. It's time to get this show on the road.
Let's race.
As we watch the start of the race here, a few comments on our team tactics. We thought they had brought 5 riders, as we noticed one guy signed up very last minute, and he was a really strong rider. So we were preparing ourselves for that scenario. But for whatever reason, he didn't show, so then we discussed our approach in a 5 versus 4 scenario. Normally, with the one rider advantage, you would go on the attack. But we still decided to stay defensive until the first bigger climb, and then see what the situation were when we got to the top, as usually people do get dropped here. If we managed to drop one more from the LEQP team, then we could really start thinking about attacking, and if not, then most likely we would continue to play defensive. As overall we thought, apart from Sanntu that is, that we would have a pretty good shot at a bunch sprint. So even if all 9 riders stayed together until the end, we fancied our chances in a sprint. With that, let's skip forward until the first climb, as the start of the race was pretty uneventful. We are now approaching the Sgurr Summitt North climb, and all 9 of us are still together. We all pushed pretty hard on the corkscrew and the breakaway brave reverse, and Sanntu in particular was pushing the pace from the front. But it was still not hard enough to break up the group, and we all managed a bit of rest before starting this climb. I wasn't sure how the other team would approach it. It is a good spot to drop riders, but you need to be careful so you don't drop your own teammates also. So I decided just to follow wheels here and see what they did, and cover as needed. Chris and Sanntu pushed pretty hard from the start, but it wasn't too hard to stay on the wheels here as there is a lot of draft. But then Sanntu kept the pressure on, and I made sure I stayed on his wheel here, even though it took a bit of effort. Mr. Hurum then pushes the pace a bit from LEQP, but all 9 riders are still together at this point. I moved to close down Mr. Hurum along with my teammate Brian, and I think we do a decent job at that. And as we get towards the final part of the climb, the pace drops just a little, and it is at this point I noticed that Chris from the other team is off the back by a few seconds, which is good news for us. As we get to the banner, I'm really happy that all of my teammates are still here, and by now Chris is some 10 seconds behind, which I know will be difficult to close for him. We have skipped forward slightly here, and we're still descending down from the climb. We're all resting quite a bit here, and nobody's pushing the pace. I noticed that Chris though, however, was pushing really hard to close the gap, and I know he's a strong rider. So for a little while we pushed the pace with Brian in the front and then Jan, and then we get to the little kick at the castle where we all pushed reasonably hard, Sanntu in particular, and I made sure I stayed on his wheel here. After this effort, I could see that Chris is now some 30 seconds behind, so we no longer need to worry about him for the rest of the race. We are now approaching the Sgurr Summitt South climb. Sanntu had pushed the pace a few times, but apart from Chris, we're all still here. I thought that if the LEQP team would make a final push, it would likely be here on this climb, so I was preparing myself for that. However, turns out it was Brian on our team who set the pace at the start, and I had a draft power-up, and this would have been a good place to use it actually. However, I wanted to make sure I had it for the sprint finish, so I saved it, as I still felt pretty strong at this point. Mr. Hurum pushes quite hard at the end of the climb, but all of the riders respond, And while he has a small gap as we'll go through the com banner, I'm not too worried since we still have 5 riders here from my team and we should be able to bring him back on the descent. And as you can see, that is exactly what happens. I tried to rest as much as I can here on the descent, as I was thinking about potentially going long today, and I also wanted to be able to cover any final moves from the LEQP team. We had a quick discussion about whether we should try to attack here on the drag leading up towards the Clyde kicker, but Sanntu must have had the same idea, as he ups the pace and we just sit on his wheel here. He then knocks off his effort and we all rest a bit before the Clyde kicker. I was still thinking about going long and I wanted to see what the picture was when we got to the top of the Clyde kicker. The first part wasn't too bad, but we all pushed pretty hard up the second bit, and I then realized I just don't have the legs today to go with 1.5 kilometers left. So instead, I'm now starting to prepare myself for the upcoming sprint. I tried to rest as much as I can here on the various kickers, and I think all the other riders had the same idea, as the pace was pretty gentle after the Clyde kicker. With around 700 meters to go, Sanntu goes to the front, and I immediately follow as I want to be able to respond if he goes for a longer effort here. He pushes a bit on the small incline at 500 meters, but nothing too serious, and by now we just have 400 meters to go. I hit my draft power up and I stay on Sanntu's wheel, and with 300 meters, he starts his sprint and I follow suit. I push as hard as I can and I manage some decent numbers for a little bit here, but turns out I went a bit too early, as with 150 meters I found myself in the front, and my teammate Brian gets a good lead out from me and pips me on the line, and I end up in second place. Now a quick look at the final results. So in the end, Brian took the win with an impressive sprint. I came in second, and I actually had slightly higher 5 and 15 second watts per kilo figures than Brian, but as always, timing is everything in the sprint. Sanntu came in third place. I'm fairly certain he's a better sprinter than Brian and me, but he'd worked quite a bit more during the race, so I think we're just a bit fresher at the end. I also want to mention Jan in fourth place. He's not really a sprinter, normally at least, but I thought he did a really good job here to grab fourth place. And finally, a quick mention of Peter. He was actually doing his first race for Swedish Swifters Ragnarök, and he did a great job. After almost getting dropped on the first climb, to then stay with the front for the rest of the race and putting in a good sprint, chapeau. So, in the end, we won this club ladder race. I think having one more rider helped quite a bit, so we need to organize a rematch with LEQP, as I think we're pretty well matched as squads overall. Okay, a few post-race thoughts before we wrap this race vlog up.
Alright, post-race thoughts. First, MUCKLE YIN. Great course. Fantastic club ladder race. Venue, really enjoy it. Lots of ups and downs. A couple climbs where you can make a difference if you got really good legs. Clyde kicker towards the end. And then, if nothing else, it's a good sprint to the finish. So, really enjoy that course. The race itself ended up being 5 versus 4, unfortunately. I thought they had a guy who signed on just before the race started, but he must just not have made it, so that's a shame. It would have been fun to go 5 versus 5, so we're definitely going to have a rematch with the Strlght team. Race started, and we had already agreed that we were going to cover the attacks, if any, until the first climb. And on the back of the first climb, we would see where we were. And I was surprised that all of our guys were together, which was really strong. Usually 1 or 2 from each team gets dropped there, but all 5 of us made it over. And one of the other guys on the Strlght team, Chris, dropped. So then it's a 5 versus 3. And we thought about maybe trying to attack, but Sanntu on the other team made a couple attacks and we covered. And Then we got to the second climb. Wasn't as hard as the first one. And I think everybody's sort of preparing themselves for a sprint finish. I thought about going long after the Clyde kicker. I had a bit left in the legs, but for some reason I decided, nah, let's just sprint it out today. Let's just see how we do. Get to the sprint, and my goal was just to sit on Sanntu's wheel. I know he has a really strong sprint, so I thought if I could stay with him in the draft, then no matter what, I'll finish pretty well. And to my surprise, I started behind him, caught him, went past, and then my teammate Brian, who must have been in my slipstream, went past me, and then he was just too strong. I just couldn't quite catch him on the very end. So we finished 1, 2, 4, and 5, I think. So a very strong team performance. Again, a bit unfair because there's only 4 of them, but we can't control that. So we'll take the win. Really good team win, all 5 of us in the sprint for the finish. Very, very strong, I'm happy with that. And hopefully we can move up the ladder the next time. All right, rest and recovery. I got another 4 or 5 days of pretty hard training coming up. And then either there'll be another club ladder race next week, or next weekend it's the one-off FRR race, as I mentioned in the introduction, where I'm gonna get absolutely smoked in the DRA category. But we're gonna give it a good crack. Anyway, this is Sam, trying to spin to win on Swift, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one. Bye-bye.